Welcome to the Site Progress Mobile Re-Engineered, the first of 3 tutorials where we're going to talk about extracting the information from Powerproject in the first tutorial, updating it on the mobile device in the second tutorial, integrating it back into Powerproject in the third tutorial. So I want to talk about the process, which remains the same if you have experienced a presentation or a user before. So we have Powerproject 15, and you do need version 15, where you've got a Powerproject plan and you're going to log into that. You're going to tag which activities are going to be updated by which mobile users, and then you're going to upload that from Powerproject to the cloud. So the information is sitting in the cloud. The mobile user gets an email telling them that tasks have been assigned to them. They log in on their device and they download the information. That's the only time they need a signal. They progress the work throughout the period, and then they add notes and photographs and progress information. And when they've finished and the end of the period has arrived, they submit those changes. The information is gone from their phone. The Powerproject originator is informed about that by an email. They log into the system again and they download it to Powerproject, where it's reintegrated into the project plan, and then they typically reschedule that plan, reassess it, make any adjustments, and republish again. So we go around this wheel of progress. So in this first tutorial, we're only going to focus on setting up the Powerproject plan as though it hasn't been done before, and creating users and changing settings and exporting that information to the cloud. So that's what lies ahead of us today, and we're going to go straight to Powerproject. So this is Powerproject, and the first thing we have to do is we have to log in to Site Progress Mobile in the cloud. And so there is a File Site Progress Mobile menu option, and we arrive at this place. If you're new to this, if it's your very first time, you will have been sent an email with login details. So we click on the login. You may have to enter your email address and password, and if it's the very first time, you'll have to change your password. So I've done this previously, so I'm logging in. So we're connecting to the cloud, so you do need to be on the internet at this stage. So then we can see that we're connected to the internet and logged in now, because we've got license information at the top. This is your serial number. This is when your subscription expires. These are the total number of licenses and available. And then we have 3 buttons over here, but really we're going to look at these first 2, and the first one we want to think about are users. Who else is going to use the system? Both my colleagues who've also got Powerproject, or also those people who are going to update it remotely, and they could be the same people. So we're going to click on the user button, and we're presented with this simple dialog, and all we do is we add individuals as we go along. So I'm going to say that we've got a remote user called not Kim but Jim Smith, and their email address, which is absolutely essential, and you have to get it right, of course. And then there's the role that this user has. So they can be an administrator. So if they're an administrator, they're allowed to create new users. If they're a publisher, they can take a plan and they can use existing users, and they can publish information to the cloud, and they can bring it back in again. If they're a mobile user, then they can only receive information at the mobile end. And so you're going to tell the remote user what their email address is for logging in, and also you're going to give them a password. So we can give them a password, and we can generate a random one for you, but it's probably better that you choose one. We can say okay, but you've got to make a note that there are some limitations and restrictions on the password combination, so you do need to consider that carefully, and you need to also remember the password and pass it on to your colleagues. So that's the information that we've created with our users. We can give each user a different color, and that allows us to identify the work that they're going to do, and we're going to look at that in a few moments. So we've created a list of users, both Powerproject publishers, administrators, and mobile users. And now we're going to talk about the settings that we can establish for every project that we might process. So I'm going to click on the settings button, and we're going to talk about the import information in a future tutorial, the third one, and we're going to focus in this tutorial on the export. So these are fairly complex combinations, and I'm going to give you a brief description, but I do urge you to read the help system, which if you press function key 1, you can see in great detail. So I'm going to go to them from the top to the bottom, and I'm going to try and rattle through them. So we've got the first one, which I haven't chosen. So first of all, I would say this combination that I have on screen is my personal preference. But if I want to use resources rather than user codes, code library elements, then you need to tick this option. But we also need to go to the resource library and say which resource is which user, which we will talk about later. This field is important, so we're going to export tasks up to a progress date that you will decide, but we won't export anything ahead of that date. But this allows you to set a window ahead of that date in case you get ahead of yourself or you do things out of sequence. But anything in that far future won't be in the list to update, but we'll talk about that further. We can apply progress on the remote device either as a duration percentage or overall percentage, which means if you have a 10-day activity and you say it's 50% complete, then you can only have 5 days remaining, and if you change the remaining duration, the percentage will change. Whereas if you choose overall percent complete, which is the recommended method, I could have done 50% of a 10-day task in 3 days, and I've still got 4 days remaining to do the other 50%. So it's just more flexible. This is important, which we'll talk about. So if in Powerproject, if I have got a value called task work assigned to an activity, then if I tick this box in the mobile device, then you will only be able to progress that activity by those quantities and not by a percentage. So if it's unticked, it will ignore the task work allocations. I'll come back to this setting because this is one that is usually for our American cousins, but this is where we only want to progress the activity by the remaining duration. We don't want to say how much has been done either in quantity or percentage. We just want to say that there's so many days remaining. So it then cuts out lots of possibilities of putting actual dates and durations in. So all of these become unavailable. But if you want to use that method, then you can, but you miss out on some of the data collection of the actuals as we go along. So the mobile behavior here is, so do I want the end user who's filling in the information to even see what the remaining duration is? So I can hide that from them. I can only get them to put in what they've done to date and not to affect what happens in the future. I personally like to do that. Even if they can see it, do we want to let them edit it? So this unticked, they'll be able to see it, but not change it. If it's ticked, they will be able to change it. Same thing here. So if you have this ticked, I can say how many days or hours it's taken us to do the work in this period, or you can prevent that being edited, and it will just take whatever it calculates it should be. You can allow or disallow actual dates to be collected. So you could merely collect a percentage and it will just update the activity in Powerproject without changing it. You can allow the end user to enter actual dates, which could be different from your planned dates, and then that information will come back into Powerproject. If you want to progress activities, at a finer level of detail than a day definition, then tick this box, because then you get an hour and minutes selector on actual information, and you can have that information at a greater degree of detail. But most people are going to have that off because it will then default to whole days. Do I want to show forecast dates? That's dates in the future. It will always show planned dates. And a new feature of Site Progress 2 is that you can allow the mobile user to create new activities as they come across them in the field, and they can come back to you. But if you don't want to allow that to happen, you can turn this off. So lots of options there. We highlight which you could turn off. We highlight those events which are ahead or behind or overdue with a color scheme. If you don't want it, turn it off, so there's no clue to the user what they should have done. You can have that color scheme taken from the live activities, which could be then different to the baseline, and you can say what the color is if it's in the future beyond the editing date. If it's due to happen in this period, you can highlight it, and if it's overdue, it should have been wholly complete, then it can be highlighted in that color. That's from the live project, or you could take that from the baseline project. So live is probably best, because I'm assuming that you're going to have a baseline that's a little bit older, you're updating the plan and you're trying to get it back on track, but it's shifted away from the baseline a little bit. So there are all the settings about the export tab, and that's the bulk of it. We've also got a tick sheet notes tab. So if we're doing a residential type project with multiple activities on one line of the plan, and I'll show this obviously in the project shortly, this is the name of the code library where those color codes for different stages of work on the same line of the plan are happening. Do we want to display short codes from that library in the mobile app, or the long names? And if we do want to auto-complete some earlier stage, so if we say we finished a roof, timbers, does that automatically mean we must have done that fourth lift of brickwork, which we should have done last week as well? So you can have that on, and it's probably worth doing. But everybody, whether you've got tick sheets or not, everybody will probably want to have notes. So you can have notes that came in previously, you can display them on the app as well, or you can prevent that being displayed. And you can have note headings that you add through this button here. So we could say that we have got an inspection issue. So that will then be added to the list of possible notes that the remote user can use. So they're all of the settings that we want to talk about at this stage. As I say, we'll come back to the import settings in the third tutorial. So we're going to confirm that, and those settings will apply to all projects that we process from this point onwards. So now we're going to talk about the projects themselves, and we have to define which projects we're going to export. We can do them one at a time, but also in this pane here we can add projects to a list. So you might have so we're going to process this project, and we're also going to process this project at the same time. So every week I'm in charge of 2 projects. I don't want to open each one in turn and export it. I want to just have them in a list, and with no projects open, I can process them all as a batch. Now I can select an individual project to process if it's not open, but also I can select all my projects with the select all button, or none of them. And with whatever selected, and we will talk about this later, we choose a future progress date that we want to be the information to come back to, and we click the export button here, and everything will be exported from all of our projects. But before we do that, the projects themselves must be established to say who's going to update which project. So I'm going to open a project, and I'm going to work through the process of saying which of our users is going to update it. So this is a residential sort of project that we talked about briefly. So we've got a number of activities that are preparation, and they're sort of classical single activities of one line, and some of them have got a quantity assigned, and that is the task work element we referred to, and lots of them have multiple tasks on a single line, and their appearance is being driven from this build stages library. So that's what we've put into the tick sheet. And we also, in that case, we need a column with a user field called plot_no, where we record what the location of this particular sequence of work is. So that's typically for residential, but often for finishings programs where you can identify the zone or the area where a sequence of activities are being carried out. But however, we need for this project to say which of our users is going to update which bit, and there are a number of ways of doing it. The most common I'll speak about first. We go to the project tab, and before we start to assign users, I just want to point out that you can also enable, on this particular project, we can enable to publish user-defined fields. So the things in the project database that we as a company haven't put in a standard, and if you have the project saved, you can go to the user field manager and you can make your own user field. So I've made one called inspector initials and inspection dates, for example, or and so with those already created, we can choose which ones of those are appropriate to send to the mobile user to get them to fill in. So I can say I want the inspector's initials to be visible on the remote device, and I want the inspection date to be visible on the remote device. So I've got to add those two items here, and that will apply. It could be different ones in different projects. But now I need to talk about using this button here, which is enabling, which is going to the cloud to get the list of users and to refresh our code library of what those users are. So we're using another code library. If it doesn't exist, it'll be created. If you've added new users to the existing one or changed them, you also need to press this button. So that's going to go to the cloud, grab the user information that we made earlier on, and it's going to create it in a library here. So there's Jim, our new guy, and there's me that we're going to use a little bit later. So if we added new users, we'd also need to enable that synchronization. So then we're going to say which of our chunks of the project are going to be done by which person. And so we've chosen to do this initially at a summary level, and we're going to use this button here, Site Progress Chart Assignments, to do it quickly. So on the left hand side I've got my list of users with their colors. On the right hand side I've got the work breakdown structure of the project, and I'm going to choose somebody, and I'm going to drag them and put them on a high level plan of the project, and I've got a bit of a hierarchy here, and so I can apply them to all of the elements of the plan. But I could say, well, actually I want somebody else to be doing the housing bit, and I want Richard Ormrod to be doing everything else. So you can have different people doing different sections of the program, but it is for everything in that summary. And it might be that you want a greater flexibility. So I just want you to understand what's happening behind the scenes. I'm going to add a column that is the code of those users. And so we can see at the summary level that we've got a code assigned, and that is telling, when we send it, the export is saying send all activities in this part of the work breakdown structure to the mobile device if appropriate, and we'll talk about what appropriate means. So if there's nothing else associated with this, if it's empty, any task assignment will look to its parent and send the information to its parent. But you could select an individual task and say, no, I want this individual task to go to Jess because she's updating just that one only. So all the ones without a code would go to Richard Ormrod. All the ones with a code would go to this user. So it is possible to be more flexible on an individual basis than before. So that's how we establish users in that way, and it's the most common way. But it is also possible that you've got different trades or different subcontractors, or you've already got the project coded up in a certain way, and so we can approach that in a different way. So if we looked at this file's properties, we can see here that we've got a library that we're nominating to be used for synchronization of users. So if I said I wanted the trades library here, not the user library, then it would look in the trades library for who would be updated. But I'm just going to reset it to that, go back to our plan and say, well, if we look in the trades library and we choose the properties of one of those codes, we can see that it's at this point we can associate a user with this different activity code. So we'd have to go through the particular library, assigning users, and then we could use this library, which you may have already coded up the activities for. So that's another means of flexibility. And the second one is where we have resources. So if you remember, if we go back to configuring our project and our settings, we had on the export tab the ability to export the resource allocations rather than user code. So if that was ticked, then we would choose a resource and we'd look at its properties, and of course we could do this in the Library Explorer, and then we would say what the user that we've defined is associated with this resource. So we've always got to associate the user library in the cloud email addresses with whichever mechanism that we want to do. But this is probably the simplest and the most common method to use this code library and the site progress chart assignments, and then be more specific if you want to. So the one thing I did forget to mention at the beginning that is important is if we go to the file options of this and the progress tab, then we have the opportunity to say which version of Site Progress Mobile you're going to use with this version of Powerproject. So the company ID and username method was the earlier version of Site Progress Mobile with any version of Powerproject before version 15, and you can still use that version with version 15 if you choose its method of logging in here. But if you want to use the new Site Progress Mobile, the updated Site Progress Mobile method only with version 15 and above, then you need to choose the email address section here. So you need to set that up at the very beginning to choose which version of Site Progress, the old one or the new one, do you want the information to be sent to. And it does work with both, but obviously in the newer one you've got far more flexibility with different methods of updating plans, and it's more flexibility. So that's the option that needs to be set at the very beginning. I now want to turn to the issue of publishing this information. So we've set up, we've made users, we've assigned them to the plan, we have checked our settings, and we have published a few user fields which we want the remote user to collect. So we come to the point of being ready to send the information out, and I just want to talk about so we're going to send the information out individually if we have the project open using this button, where we're going to choose a date in the future. We're going to choose a user and a date in the future that we want that progress to be collected by. So it's that progress date I want to talk about now before I do it. So here's my project, and it has been progressed already up to the 27th of May. I want it to be progressed in the field until I want the information coming back by the 10th of June. So that's the Monday. So I'm going to set a progress date at the end of Sunday. So all of those things that lie within that stripe, and I've just colored that in so you can see it, that is the future progress date. And I want to know how all of these tasks have got on in that period. If something's 100% done, it will not be in the list of things to be updated. And if something's fully outside that stripe, like this activity, it won't be included in the list of things to look at to say whether they've been progressed. So if any part of a task touches that stripe, it will be in the list to progress. So we don't want to export everything. We want to give you a focused list of what's likely to be updated. So whilst it's important to know what that date is, because we're going to use that date to calculate the planned percent of this activity or the planned amount of work, or so we need to remember that date, but you can set in the configuration settings, you can set a further period in calendar days. How far ahead of that progress date should we also export information? So I've set that to 14 days ahead. That's including weekends. So it's taking my progress date and it's adding a further two weeks onto it. So anything that falls within the blue stripe will also be exported. So this will be in the export list, as will this, but this one won't be because it's outside. So you can make that as large as you want, but the bigger it becomes, you catch more future activities which are unlikely to be progressed, and you're just giving the mobile user a bigger problem to keep on stepping through. So the ideal situation is a short period ahead. You keep the program up to date, so you're not going to get things far in the future. But if you do want to change the progress state of something that is 100% complete, only the Powerproject planner can do that. So we've reached the point where we're ready to export that. So again, if a single project is open, I click on the export button. I can choose one or more users if they're included in this file, and I can choose that future date when I want the information to be updated. So I'm going to say I want it at the end of Sunday the 9th of May, just in case they've done any work over the weekend. So I choose that date, I choose my user, I just click on OK, and then we've got to be connected to the internet at this point. So it's sending that information to the cloud, and it confirms that that has been done successfully. So now it's waiting in the cloud. In tutorial 2, we're going to look at bringing that from the cloud to the remote device. And I also want to look back at this point in time. So I'm going to close this project. But if I had a series of projects to update, I would not have them open individually. I would have edited them individually, so I'd said which user they go to. But once I've done that, I could select a whole list here, and I could choose that future date. And I could click export here, which I'm not going to do because I've already exported one of those. And then all of that information will go up to the cloud. In the same way, you can bring that information back down again, because you can import it. So this list is like a filter of what's in the cloud, what's ready to be exported, what has been submitted and ready to be imported, what's all in use and hasn't yet been submitted, what's been exported but hasn't yet been used, what's been archived, everything, and you can delete things on the server this way as well. So we'll talk more about that on import in tutorial 3, but that is the extent of this tutorial where we're talking about configuring a project to be used with Site Progress Mobile. There's a little bit of setup at the beginning. It's worth understanding it, and all you've got to do then really is, having created the users, established the settings, you open each project in turn, say who's going to do it, and then it's always there, and all you've got to do every week or every month is just export it with that future date, review it on the way back in, and it makes your life so much simpler. And it could be you that is doing the mobile updating, even if you're the Powerproject user, because you're out in the field and you're collecting information that you can synchronize in minutes. So thank you for listening, and I look forward to outlining the use of Site Progress Mobile on the remote device in tutorial 2.